tell us what happened at that meeting.
Can I preface it with a little background first?
Sure.
Then let's clear up what meeting we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Oh, the meeting with the command staff that, where whatever happened, please tell us about that, or preface it, describe what happened.
This is the one that I indicated was hearsay in the memo that we got. Okay.
But prior to my arrival in Columbia, the chain of command did not get to respond to internal affairs investigations. It came from internal affairs, it went to the chief decided everything. I implemented a more participative model because I value the chain of command's input from the standpoint that most cases are not as serious as this one. And if you're talking about an officer that's engaging in a pursuit or some similar policy violation that they shouldn't have been in, that first line supervision has a much better insight than I do into what kind of officer this is, what kind of attitude they have, and can give me input on what punishment will correct the behavior. And so I implemented that model. This was the first situation where we were talking, first situation ever with the chain of command considering a termination, or recognizing that I was considering termination. So this group of men, Lieutenant Kelly was out of town, but Brad Nelson, Steve Monticelli, Bruce Houston, and myself all sat down, and the purpose of the meeting was to get their input on what they thought had occurred. So they, as they testified, said, we agree with internal affairs. So part of the discussion, and I have a much better recollection than they do apparently, part of the discussion went toward why I thought that the conclusion of internal affairs was incorrect. So I explained that to them, that we couldn't have an unfounded complaint. Exonerate it if you want to, but you can't have an unfounded, because that means it didn't happen, and my eyes tell me it did. So we had that discussion, and that is why you have different, on the, you cited Captain Nelson's, for instance. He agreed with me on 2 eventually, after initially walking into the room saying he agreed with internal affairs. When I explained to them that that wasn't possible, then he sustained the first 2 and still stood his ground on the medical attention. I will tell you that there was a clear, tense situation in the room. They said over and over again, we don't want him to lose his job. Now, none of them ever told me that they shouldn't lose his job. We don't want him to lose his job. The personal relationships were evident, and when they gave me their recommendations and said that they did not think that they should be sustained, I said, well, I'm going to tell you right now, that is going to be my conclusion. So assuming that, let's move forward. And you tell me, I'm going to come back to you and ask you for a disciplinary recommendation anyway. So let's talk about it. When I told them that I thought they should be sustained, give me a recommendation. And you can tell by the recommendations, they didn't want to do it. But that was their recommendation. Nobody said 1 day suspension would work. They started at 15 days. The Deputy Chief of Police recommended 30, which is the maximum, I think, under policy that we can give. I think that's incorrect. I think 15 is the maximum, short of termination. And we had that discussion, as one of them testified, with Deputy Chief Monticelli. There was no pressure on anybody. This was strictly a command staff meeting to try to come to a consensus, give me your input. Ultimately, it's my responsibility. Ultimately, it's my decision. And so I listened to their input. I told them what my decision would be, and the most likely the outcome. Sergeant Houston made reference to an incident that had happened earlier. What he is referring to is a complaint supervisory investigation that he conducted, where 2 elderly ladies stopped to watch an officer conduct a traffic stop that one of the ladies' son was involved in. The backup officer leaves the traffic stop, goes over to these ladies and says, "You have to leave." She said, "Officer, with all due respect, I've not had the best luck with the Columbia Police Department, nor has my family, and I'm gonna stay right here and make sure that this is handled as it should be." They weren't interfering with the traffic stop, they weren't bothering us at all. Sitting over on the side of the road. This officer, it escalated, got more and more angry with these women because they wouldn't leave, to the point where one of them, he orders one of them out of the car. "I'm gonna issue you a citation, you're on private property, I'm gonna criminal trespass you from this property." He orders the lady out of the car and she says, "May I get my cane, please?" That's the scenario. It came through as a courtesy complaint from these ladies. They said the officer was rude to them, had yelled at them, and that they were just sitting there watching the traffic stop. They weren't gonna hurt a thing. She said the officer raised his voice and just went crazy on them. Well, this complaint I'd not even seen until it came to my desk as a completed investigation with a letter in it prepared for my signature telling these ladies that this officer had done nothing wrong and that her complaint had no merit. So, based on her allegations and what he comes up with over here, I said, what the heck, I'll just listen to the audio video. So I popped it in my computer, and it was obvious to me at that time, Sergeant Houston had never seen that video. There's no way he could have concluded what he did. I mean, what the lady said is exactly what happened. So he was called to my office. He was asked if he wanted to continue to be a sergeant. And if he did, he needed to step up. And if he didn't, he could step down, or that if another incident like this happened, I would step him down. I dressed him down very, very harshly because he put the department in position of being embarrassed, because I can tell you right now what would have happened. That lady would have marched straight over to the civilian review board. We'd have been standing in this room embarrassed. So that's why Sergeant Houston says he was fearful. But he was not put under any kind of pressure. This was simply a chain of command review of the Sanders incident. And nobody got any pressure. So my 2 cents, thought that would clear the air for me a little bit.
Is there anything else you want to say about the witness's testimony that came before you today?
Well, I would highlight for the board that only one of them still works here. Everybody else is retired or gone on to other things. And, you know, I'm not, I am not a patient man when I'm dealing with incompetence, or I'm dealing with something that is going to embarrass us. But I am a fair man. And the people that work with me would tell you that. Those that no longer do, maybe they've got another motivation.
Cross-examine?
So everybody who left was a bad apple, right?
Not at all.
Those were the subversives, right?
Not at all. A couple of them.
But apparently they have their own agendas now. And so when they come in here and testify truthfully that they did not agree with you, even though I was given an email that said they did, well, that's their fault, right?
No, they didn't agree with me when they walked in the door. By the time we finished the meeting, they had agreed to suspend.
Because you said you're going to agree with me, because there is no other option, true?
That just didn't happen.
Didn't happen. Didn't happen. Nothing ever happened. You have an answer for everything, don't you, Chief? Everything is somebody else's fault, isn't it?
I've heard that before.
Did Sergeant Houston agree with the IA?
When he came in the door, as I explained, he did not. Or not, he did agree with internal affairs.
Lieutenant Kelly agreed with internal affairs.
According to his email, yes, he did.
Captain Nelson agreed with internal affairs.
Yes, he did.
Deputy Chief Monticelli agreed with internal
No,
affairs.
he did not.
He did not, Brad Nelson's lying.
Yes.
Okay.
Or just doesn't have a very good memory, he admitted that.
Because you remember everything crystal clear.
I do.
Much better than they did. No further questions.
Chief, I assume you don't take it lightly when you take these decisions and that etches into your memory.
Of course I don't. Ending someone's livelihood is not an easy thing to do, but unfortunately it's a part of my job when these kind of things happen.
And these were all recommendations. Ultimately, the decision was yours.
That's correct.
I've got a question, Mr. Chief. It goes on to what I talked about a few minutes ago, and that is, have there been some changes as a result of this case?
Yes, sir.
But practices in the past, such as you get one warning, we try to calm you down, and then you bang on the door again, we're coming in. That was a practice.
Yes,
Up
sir.
until the time Sanders was terminated.
Yes, sir.
And you didn't like that practice.
The practice had nothing to do with it. I didn't have a problem with the practice initially. What I had a problem with in this case is we did not have to go into that jail cell and do what he did.
But the practice until that time was, now let me finish. The practice at that time was, we ask you to calm down, you don't do it, you're still banging on the door, we're coming in. That's what the practice of the CPD for many, many years.
The practice of the CPD, they give you the warning, you don't calm down, they go in and they put you on the ring.
You didn't know about that though, until this came up apparently.
No, I heard about the practice, and I come from departments that had never allowed anybody being handcuffed to a fixed object, period. So when I learned of it, yes, I was skeptical, but I didn't come in and just say we're not doing it anymore. The holding cell situation in the Columbia Police Department is not the best in the world. I mean, it's just a basic system down there. So I wasn't going to come in and take that away from them from what they're doing. The only issue I had in this whole case, walk in there and put the man on the ring. Walk in there and do it. Get the resources you need to do, take him over there, handcuff him to the ring. I have no issue with that. I have an issue with bouncing him off the wall first.
What do you say about Sergeant Craig's testimony the other time, though? He said he wouldn't have ever expected that, and it was 6 to 8 feet away. That's a long darn way.
You know, it's in the officers, it's the officer's responsibility to try to anticipate those things. And his opinion is similar to mine. I don't know that I would have expected that either, but it happened. And the person responsible for that level of force was former Officer Sanders.
Other questions of the chief?
I have a question. Under direct testimony, you testified that when you came on board, you introduced a more participative management style to the department compared to a more autocratic style that preceded you.
In internal affairs, yes, sir.
Okay. In this memo, this double hearsay memo that we've talked about at length today, it states that the meeting asked for individual recommendations from the participants.
That's correct.
And then it goes on that these next 5 statements were those individual recommendations.
Yes, sir.
But we've heard testimony today that these were not the recommendations that were made to you.
Not the initial recommendations. Picture the beginning of the meeting, everybody walking in, and we go down the road and say, what do you think? You reviewed the file, what do you think? They all said they agreed with internal affairs. After that, a discussion took place where I explained that the conclusion of internal affairs could not be possible. It's just not possible based on the definition.
Okay.
And in people's defense, okay, the new internal affairs where we were using sustained, not sustained, exonerated, or unfounded was new to them, okay?
During this meeting, were you asking for their opinions
Yes.
and recommendations, or
Yes.
were you trying to sell them?
I asked you, before we ever said a word, I went around the room and I asked them what they said. When they told me what they had decided, I said, okay, I'm going to make a decision that they're sustained. So now you know they're sustained. I'm going to sustain all 3. You've given me your recommendation. I've heard it. It didn't change my mind after what I read. So I'm saying sustained.
So you would state here under oath that these are their recommendations.
Yes. When we walked out of that meeting, those were their recommendations.
These were their internal personal recommendations.
Yes.
Even Sergeant Houston,
Yes.
even though he testified here today that he said it but didn't believe it.
He didn't feel it in his heart. He said it.
He said it, he didn't believe it.
Yes. And after hearing him tonight, I believe that. But that day, He told me what I thought he was in his heart. I don't know. I can't speak to what happened 2.5 years ago, you know, but tonight, it was news to me that he didn't believe in what he was telling me. There was clearly I told you, there was clearly an attitude in the room. We didn't want to do this. This is somebody we've known for 18 years, most of them, some of them even longer
But
than
you
that.
must be terribly convincing, because you changed all these people's minds.
Must be. When you explain to them logically why you're doing what you're doing. And I have the luxury of looking at it with no names on it. Okay, I'm looking at the facts. I didn't know Rob Sanders well. And I didn't know, at that point, I'd only known most of those officers a little bit less than 2 years. So I didn't know anybody in the room well. I don't have any loyalties I have to deal with. As the chief of police, I can deal strictly with the facts, and that's my job.
And you're very persuasive.
I may be.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We did know Rob Sanders, though. We had a hearing with Rob Sanders before.
Oh, sure. But that's the limited contact I had with him was on disciplinary matters. He worked nights, you know, and I worked primarily the day shift. When I saw Rob, it was usually a disciplinary thing.
Do you think maybe you learned some things, though, through this process from Mr. Sanders that really did influence you, and you changed the department policies and practices after that for the better
Oh, sure.
as a result of this incident?
Absolutely we did.
But he was operating under some practices that have been around for a long time.
You know, and I think we're going back to whether or not he should have chained the guy to the floor. Nobody has a problem with that. It's what happened before.
Well, one of the things that happened before is he entered the holding cell.
That's
and
correct.
You have an issue with that.
I had an issue with him entering to do what he did. I don't have an issue with us going in there. And as I testified earlier, you know, you had other options. Give him a glass of water, see if that doesn't work. If he throws it at you, go to plan B. I mean, you know, there were just other options than putting yourself in harm's way.
Yet that hadn't been the practice of the department for many, many years.
Common sense tells you, do I have to go in there?
Absolutely, it tells you that, but yet there's a practice of doing something else. I mean, when I saw that video, I was stunned. But then I hear all this practice stuff that's gone on for years and years and years, and it seems like maybe he's the fall guy for it.
Now, you know, you have to look at the force itself and whether it was justified, whether it was abusive. And, you know, an 18-year officer should have learned a few things in 18 years as well. In that, you know, if I'm gonna use it as an excuse that this guy is so dangerous, why go in there? Or why, if I am gonna go in there, let's go in with a plan, other than just shoving him up against the wall and hoping for the best.
Why go in there to me is that's our practice. You got your warning, we tried to talk you down, you came and did it again, our practice is we're coming in. That's what CPD has done. I don't like that.
I don't either.
I hate that,
I do too.
but that was the practice.
And the practice is, you know, I can't do anything about that because it happened years before I got here. All I can be responsible for is what I've discovered and then fixed since I've been here.
Other witnesses who came before the board tonight talked about that's what their training officer had told them to do. That's what their supervisor had told them to do. But Sanders is the guy who gets fired for it, and so everybody knows you don't do that anymore.
But again, he didn't get fired for that. He got fired for bouncing the man off the wall and hurting his back.
Which seems to me like, from the testimony we heard from the department's use of force guy, Sergeant Craig, that this is totally unexpected. He would have never thought that was happening.
He's entitled to his opinion, and you guys will have to weigh that. I'm telling you, you shut somebody that hard, you should expect some injury on the end, something. Maybe not a broken back, but something.
Other questions?
I got a question about the cell, the holding cells. A lot of testimony, discussions been brought up about water. Are the fountains, lavatories, whatever they are they shut off, or do they just not work?
They work now.
What were they then?
That's when I discovered that they didn't work. I asked the same question, why is it the water off? Do they not work? What's the problem? And it's a push button system from what I understand. don't quote me on this because somebody will call me a liar, but I was told they were push buttons so that they just stay on for a few seconds and then they go off. So my guess was at the time that there was corrosion or something in the fixtures that was not allowing, or didn't allow people to push it, or it was in fact shut off for some maintenance reason and just never repaired. That's my guess.
Chief, I want to go back to this meeting with your command staff. And I understand the discrepancy between the verbiage that the internal affairs team used and the way you understood who you thought that finding should be. But let me ask you this. Did your command staff believe that Officer Sanders did anything wrong that warranted disciplinary action?
Obviously they did, because they.
No, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So
I'm-
so when they said that they came in and agreed with internal affairs, which said that they didn't find anything wrong, when they came into your meeting, and yes, they concurred, they agreed with internal affairs, even though you may not agree with the verbiage that they used, my takeaway from this is that internal affairs and your command staff came to the conclusion that Officer Sanders didn't do anything wrong and didn't deserve any punishment for it.
I don't think so.
And you disagreed with that.
Yeah.
I understand, and that's your prerogative to do so. But, I mean, do you agree that they disagreed with you on what the facts were and what the outcome should be of that? And you still have that prerogative of making a senior decision and executing on that. That's your prerogative as its chief. But would you disagree with me that they disagreed with you on the facts of wrongdoing and the fact that there should be a disciplinary action taken?
Yes, I would agree with you. But I think that they were basing it on what happened in the apartment as justification for the force of what happened in the locked jail cell. And that's one thing that I could never get my arms around with this thing. The man was in a locked cell. The fight was over. We went in and re-engaged the fight, and as a result, this man was injured. So we had choices. We made some of the wrong ones. And if you want to base it on practice, okay, that was the practice of the police department. It shouldn't have been. I think I heard at least one of you say that you don't like it either, and it shouldn't be the way we treat people. You know, the fact that it was a practice, I acknowledge. It's no longer the practice. But even when it was the practice, to chain somebody to the floor, it was not prefaced by bouncing them off the wall when they were showing passive resistance. Everybody that's testified here said passive resistance. You saw with your own eyes the kind of resistance Mr. Baker was giving. He was standing with his head down, imploring them to give him water when he was launched through the air. That's not resistance. Those three officers, they wanted more, they called more, gone in there and used what Sergeant Craig said they were taught as far as taking people to the wall, done it safely, nobody would have been injured, we wouldn't all be sitting here. But we didn't do it. We could have offered him a glass of water, and maybe he would have sat over there on the bench and gone to sleep. We don't know, because we never tried it. Those were options that we should have been responsible enough to at least consider. When we're talking about a human being that's asking us for water. And that's where I come from.
Anything else? Thank you once again. And now we're ready for our summary statements.